All right, you knew it was coming. You knew I had to talk about this one. This was one of my most anticipated albums of the year, and I've been having an absolute ball diving into it. So, without further ado, let's just dive into it.
God ain't listening and we're deaf too. Liar, liar, the world's on.
Rockstar by Dolly Parton. So, Dolly Parton, do I even need to give Dolly Parton a introduction? You know, Jolene, 9 to 5, the pop goddess of the 70s and 80s. Yeah, I don't really think I need to. If you haven't heard of Dolly at this point, I don't know what to say. But the thing that I love about this, so Dolly Parton, a couple of years ago, I think it was last year, was actually inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And at first, you know, I was like, Dolly, you know, country, western, folk legend of Dolly Parton. Is she really rock and roll? But what Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is more of like artists and bands and musicians that have made an impact of rock and roll throughout the ages. And to say that Dolly didn't have an impact on rock and roll is to put your head in the sand. You know, like she had a huge impact on rock and roll, and a lot of rock artists have quoted her as a huge inspiration. So I think with that, Dolly was like, well, if y'all think that I'm not rock and roll, I'm going to prove you wrong by putting out this massive double disc epic of all of my favorite rock music, and even write a number of amazing banging originals for rock music as well. And so, yeah, this album is, you know, a handful of original pieces by Dolly, but the bulk of it are covers that she has done of rock classics. My best way to put my experience with this album and how I approach this album is when I was growing up, we had a rock station. You know, we had Rock 95 in Barrie, and we also had Q107 in the Toronto area. And both of those rock stations kind of had a leaning towards the 70s, you know, classic rock, and then the 80s kind of new wave a little bit, more so on the Rock 95. Just kind of cycling through those classic rock tracks that everybody kind of loved to hear. You know, it was kind of like if you took a poll from a group of like 100, these were like the 75 tracks that everybody could agree, yeah, we'll listen to it. You know, it might not necessarily be our favorite tracks from either these artists or the genre, but I'm not ever going to run over to the stereo to turn it off. So I grew up listening to this style of music. And I feel like listening to this album brings me back to that time where, you know, these tracks feel like a homecoming. I'm very familiar with most of them, and all of the new tracks fit very well because, especially with Rock 95, they tried to be a little bit, you know, a contemporary and on the edge, and like, hey, this is the new track from this up and coming band. So it kind of feels like it's being put into the fold very, very well. It feels like I'm being put into the backseat of my parents' car as we're doing a road trip up to the cottage in Muskoka with one of those, you know, rock stations being on. And I loved it. It had just enough of the nostalgia aspect to it, with enough of kind of new things on it to keep my attention and to, you know, kind of remind myself, ooh, this is interesting. We've got some new things going on here. Obviously, there are 30 tracks on here, so I'm not going to do every single track because we'd be here all day. What I particularly love and what I want to start off with is within a lot of the covers, she actually has individuals helping her out, and she has a number of features on these. Sometimes she actually has the original composer, singer, or band members from it, like the third track of Every Breath You Take has Sting on it. Baby, I Love Your Way has Peter Frampton on it. Wrecking Ball, of all tracks, has the original Miley Cyrus on there. Magic Man has Ann Wilson on it. Freebird, the ending track, has Leonard Skinner on it, and Let It Be has Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. I mean, if anybody can bring Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney together, it's going to be Dolly Parton. With these features, you are able to hear how the artists that originally penned these tracks have matured, and they've been with this track sometimes for over 40 years, how it's matured and how it's settled and how it's kind of grown on them, and how they're able to bring their new flavor and new taste to it. Some individuals that weren't on the original. You know, Stairway to Heaven has Lizzo of all individuals and Sasha Flute on it. And man, that track of Stairway to Heaven, like what Dolly is able to do with a lot of these classic covers, specifically Stairway to Heaven, Let It Be, and Freebird, we know these tracks inside and out. And so instead of just doing a straight up kind of paint by numbers, phone it in style of these tracks, she breathed so much light into it. There was this breath of energy and livelihood that's being brought within it. And I feel like Dolly is doing that same thing with Lizzo and with Sasha Flute. The same thing can be said about I Can't Get No Satisfaction, which includes Pink and Carly. I believe it's Brandy Carly. Again, with a song that I'm not a huge fan of, I'm not a big fan of Rolling Stones, I really love what Pink and Brandy are able to bring to the table with Dolly's kind of orchestration and Dolly's overwatch or overlords. I couldn't think of the proper word there. But I love just how she's able to breathe that big energy to these tracks that we know forwards, backwards, and side to side. But look no further than Freebird. Like, we all know Freebird. We know Freebird. It's a track that we always yell out at a live show, regardless of who's playing, you know? But that ending guitar riff, it's so beautiful and brilliant. And Dolly at the end of this track coming in and just doing her thing is just amazing, you know? And it kind of shows that if you still have it, flaunt it. And that's always been Dolly's MO. And man, is she ever able to flaunt it. And yeah, I've been absolutely loving this. And it's kind of a greatest hits of a lot of my favorite rock and roll classics, without it ever feeling dull or ever feeling like, ugh, you know, because sometimes you get onto these conglomeration, big epic albums and it feels very cringe, but Dolly knows exactly how to deliver these tracks without it feeling either repurposed too much or too much of the same thing. She knows how to put enough of her own personality into it to create something very unique and very energizing and extremely entertaining. I mean, look no further than Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me with Elton John on it. You know, like she could have chosen a lot of big, heavy rockin' tracks from the Elton John discography, but she chose the track that she knew she wanted to perform and could perform perfectly. You know, and even with like the oddballs like Wrecking Ball and even a little bit like I Hate Myself for Loving You with Joan Jett and the Blackhearts on there, and Tried to Rock and Roll Me. Man, just the song collection of tracks on here. It blows me away. It absolutely blows me away. My final piece and the final thing that I want to end this on is the original tracks on here flow perfectly with all these covers. You know, like the first two tracks of Rockstar and World on Fire, it shows that she can write and perform these really hard-hitting rock tracks toe-to-toe with some of the classics. You know, this does not feel out of place. I've been listening to a lot of, you know, Christmas albums where you'll have newer artists come in and do the classic works, you know, like Let It Snow and White Christmas and I'll Be Home for Christmas and all those other ones. And then they'll have like their own unique tracks and it feels so out of place. Like it feels like such a sore thumb. This World on Fire and Rock song feels so perfect and so well matched with Magic Man and I Want You Back and Purple Rain and Baby I Love Your Way and I Hate Myself for Loving You. Absolute delight. Absolute delight. So yeah, in the end, Rockstar lived up to and exceeded my expectations. You know, I was thoroughly excited and really looking forward to this release. And it met and exceeded all of that. I've been loving this track and I've been keeping both of the CDs in my car. I even went out and I bought the big 4-disc deluxe vinyl box set because of how much I've been enjoying this one. And really, you can't do wrong. You really can't do wrong with this one. If you're a fan of this style of, you know, the classic rock, putting on the classic rock station from like the 90s and 2000s and just having a ball with it, you're going to love this album. You know, it's the best of rock. It really is. And it's all being done by Dolly in her best way. And That's all I got. That's all I got. This was a treat. So in the end, I will say Rockstar by Dolly Parton is one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. I mean, you would think that an album that's almost 2.5 hours would have filler or would have low points, but there's none. There's none. And that alone is something to be applauded. I'm really excited to see if Dolly is going to follow this up with like Rockstar 2, where she goes a little bit later on. You know, she already did Wrecking Ball and she did a number of, you know, contemporary stuff, but I would love to see her do more like metal and grunge, you know, like a Metallica Enter Sandman, or a Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, or Lithium, or heck, a Black Hole Sun, you know, or a Creed's Arms Wide Open, you know, like let's get some of that butt rock. Let's get some of that grunge. Let's do like a Radiohead Karma Police, you know, like I would love to see a follow up to this where it's kind of moving the needle a little bit more, like a Green Day's Brain Stew. Man, I just, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, where could she really pick some songs for the next generation? So if you haven't listened to Rockstar yet by Dolly Parton, go and check it out. It's an absolute treat. You know, it never takes itself too seriously. And, you know, because my main MO is progressive rock and progressive metal music, that can get a little too serious at times. And I always feel like there's a hard, you know, outside for a few outliers, you know, there's not like that fun aspect that a lot of bands have. And I'm so glad to see Dolly is able to balance the serious with the silly. And this album is that. You know, there's so many moments on here that I'm like, oh, this is silly and interesting. But she's also dead serious about it as well. So hats off. This is a run, don't walk. You got to listen to it if you haven't already. Because it's the perfect blend of nostalgia and fun. So there you go. That's my thought of Rockstar from Dolly Parton. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I'm going to leave it there. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.